Well, let's get more now on the autumn statement. And I'm joined by Alex Wilde from the Taxpayers Alliance and also from our Westminster studio, the blogger and political commentator Aaron Bastani. Thank you both very much for joining us. Alex Wilde, to you first of all, the Chancellor has talked about lower spending, higher borrowing. He says this is something that the UK can sustain, that we're in a place where we're able to afford to behave like that. Do you think he's right?
No, I think he's completely wrong. I mean, we've got to be realistic. I mean, we're talking about austerity. If you actually look at how much George Osborne cut current spending by, he cut it by 0.2% after adjusting for inflation. We simply cannot afford this. I mean, debt has increased, will increase by more than 500% from 2001. This is completely unsustainable. We've got an ageing population, massive demographic headwinds coming. The Chancellor should have used this, what wiggle room he felt was available, should have been used to cut taxes instead. All this spending on infrastructure just doesn't work.
OK, Aaron Bastani, you're snorting with derision there. I can almost hear it all the way from Westminster.
Well, yeah, I mean, since 2010, public spending as a percentage of GDP has been cut from 45 to 40%. A historic cut. Really, that kind of cut hasn't happened since the 1930s. So Alex's first point is complete baloney, as nearly every single viewer watching this will tell you, cuts to taxes have been a hallmark of the Tories since 2010, to corporation tax, capital gains, high earners. So the idea that we need to cut taxes further is ridiculous. Look, you've just seen the US election
decided... Put up stamp duty, though, haven't they?
What's that?
Put up stamp duty, though.
VAT.
Look, they're here at VAT too, but I mean, really, it's not much. Broadly speaking, the agenda was reducing taxes for high earners, for corporations, to generate higher revenues through higher tax receipts coming from those businesses, from those high earners. That hasn't worked. If you look at what's just happened in the US, we've had a presidential election decided to a broad extent by a guy who said, look, we should be spending more on infrastructure, hospitals, schools, roads, rail. He didn't just say that to win the Republican primary, Donald Trump, by the way. He said it to win the White House. And I thought the Tories, to some extent, would take his lead, particularly in infrastructure and stimulus spending, and they haven't done it. And for me, that means we've lost one decade. Guess what? We're about to lose another.
Alex?
Well, I thought we were talking about the autumn statement rather than Donald Trump. But all this infrastructure spending, I mean, like, there's so little evidence that this actually works in an open economy with a free-floating exchange rate. Look at how much money Japan has spent on infrastructure over the past decade. They've spent trillions, absolutely trillions, and it just doesn't work. Tax cuts are far more effective. If you look at corporation tax, for example, that is a tax on investment. All of this additional borrowing that the government is going to do has a massive opportunity cost with it. It's all very well saying that interest rates are low and we can afford to borrow, but the opportunity cost is that those are funds that have to be attracted from the private sector. So private investment will fall.
But as you say, that is the argument, isn't it, Alex, that at the moment it costs so little to borrow, your money's not making anything. If you invested in something like an infrastructure project, which could potentially give you a big return in the longer term, you're going to get more bang for your buck.
But it's the opportunity cost, and we've only got to look at what the government prioritises when it comes to infrastructure spending to demonstrate that they don't have a clue what they're doing. Hinkley Point, HS2, these are terrible projects. They cost tens and tens of billions of pounds. They've got absolutely appalling benefit-cost ratios. The government does not know what it's doing here. It's much better to leave that money in private hands because they make investments for business reasons rather than for political reasons.
Aaron Bastani, what would you like to see the Chancellor do yesterday?
Well, Hammond, I think, has outlined a £23 billion stimulus effectively to infrastructure. Labour's saying they'd do £350 billion. And look, that's not just roads, that's not just rail, that's broadband, that's connectivity, that's about creating a new kind of economy. It's about helping our schools and universities create the kinds of people, the kind of graduates we need to be a highly successful economy. And look, we're not where we need to be. The world is a very competitive place, not just on low-paid labour. We can't compete there, and that's what the Tories have tried to do for the last 6-7 years. We have to go for high value, high productivity, high education, goods and services. It requires a volte-face in thinking around our economy. That will require lots of money. Alex's
But do you think the Chancellor's done that? Do you think the Chancellor's been bold enough in moving in that direction?
Nowhere near. I'm critical of the Tories. Even I expected something more. Again, taking the lead from Trump. The other guest says, well, what's Trump got to do with it? Trump is context, right? Trump, I think, is potentially a new kind of conservatism which responds to the failure precisely of austerity and this ideology of low taxes for what they used to call expansionary fiscal contraction. We can spend less and we'll have higher growth. We now know austerity means not just low growth, but higher debt. Higher debt. So I don't quite understand Alex's point. This is a failed ideology. It's not working. It hasn't worked. Didn't work in the 80s, 90s. It really has collapsed in the 2010s.
OK, Alex, you're shaking your head throughout that.
Well, it just doesn't make sense. How can austerity is reducing the fiscal deficit? How can that increase the debt? It just simply doesn't make sense.
The debt is set to peak 12 years after the global financial crisis. The crisis starts.
It would have gone up by a lot more if you've had your way, though, wouldn't it?
Oh, a counterfactual. Well done. I mean, you can give me a counterfactual about anything. We've got reality. It's failed. OK?
It's failed. Why has it failed? What's it failed to do?
Wages down 10 point.
The purpose of it is to reduce the budget deficit.
Hey, listen, Alex, I'll tell you. Wages down 10.4% since 2007. Productivity stagnant. GDP per capita since 2007, 1% up.
This is the result of a recession. It's got nothing to do with austerity.
Hey,
that's a recession. It's different.
It was 9 years ago. It was 9 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
So when are you going to get rid of this excuse? 9 years after most recessions, we're far and away beyond this kind of growth, wages and productivity we currently have. And you know that. You're not silly.
I'm not here to represent the government. Like, I don't know if you think I'm here to represent I'm here criticising the government, saying they haven't done enough.
The agenda they've pursued is the one that you and your organisation have peddled. It's failed.
No,
just admit
they have not.
Be a big
OK.
They haven't done what
Let's
you said they should do.
Let's move away from picking over the last 9 years and look ahead to the future. One of the other things that came out yesterday is the cost of Brexit. We've now had a figure put on that, Alex. Do you think that that's a reasonable sum?
Well, these forecasts, I mean, there's so much uncertainty. I mean, the forecasts are just complete junk, really. I mean, they're making their best guess, but I mean, if you look through the documents, the OBR are trying to ask the government what the arrangement's going to be, and the government's sort of not telling them anything. So they're really just basing it on
So you think the 59 million is just a stab in the dark?
It might be. It might be right. It might be wrong in either direction. I think we've got to be very careful in that we don't report forecasts as facts here. And it's actually much more important to look at what the policy decisions are rather than these forecasts, because they're so difficult. I mean, I'm not criticising the OBR. I mean, it's just forecasts. Forecasting is very, very difficult. An economy is such a complex thing that it's very difficult to predict these things.
Aaron, do you think we should be putting any credence on this sum?
Well, I agree with Alex. Look, the lesson we've learned, again, from the last 6 years is that forecasts, particularly OBR forecasts, and that, again, is not a problem for the OBR. Forecasting is difficult. Britain post-crisis is particularly difficult. They don't really add up to very much. We were told in 2011 we'd be back to trend growth by 2015. Yesterday we were told we'll be back to trend growth by 2019. So they don't mean very much. If anything, though, I think they'll be worse than what the OBR is forecasting, the real figures.
The other thing that we were thinking about before yesterday's autumn statement was this phrase, the jams, Alex. A lot was made of these people who are just about managing. Do you feel that Philip Hammond really gave anything for these people or gave enough?
Well, there was a little bit of sort of watering down of some of the universal credit cuts. But I mean, really, the big issue here is one of housing. And I'm sorry, but, you know, chucking a few £1 billion at a government house building programme isn't going to solve this. We've got a massive problem with the cost of housing, which is caused by supply-side constraints. The government does not allow houses to be built. There's too many restrictions on height of buildings in city centres and things like the Greenbelt. We've got to get more houses built, and the government doesn't have to do that. The government needs to get out the way, free up some land for development so we can build some houses. I mean, that is the key driver of this, is the cost of housing. That's why people are struggling more than anything else.
Aaron, do you think there was anything in there to help the jams?
For housing, absolutely not. But look, everybody says housing, supply-side problems. There are demand-side problems too. If wages had kept up with the inflation of housing since 1971, average wages would be £88,000 a year. They're £26,000 a year. So we have a demand-side problem with housing because people's wages haven't kept up with the increase in the cost of housing. Now, how do we get around that? I think we need higher wages. And yes, I agree, we need a very different policy on housing. Absolutely. Look, a quantum leap away from what Hammond was proposing yesterday.
NHS, social care, Alex, that's something that didn't really get a mention. Are you surprised by that?
No, not particularly. I think that there's obviously a lot of pressure on the government coming from from people in the NHS calling for more spending. But I think he actually did the right thing. I mean, at the last, ahead of the last election, the head of the NHS promised to find sort of £22 billion of efficiency savings, and I actually think throwing more money at it now is exactly the wrong thing to do. They've got to make do with what they've got and start reforming this system. I mean, there's going to be a huge, huge problem for the NHS in the next 20 years. This is a model designed in the 1940s. It's not going to keep working, and eventually there's going to, unless we make difficult decisions now, I mean actually genuinely difficult decisions about how we pay for these things, then we're going to run into a lot of trouble in the next sort of 20 to 30 years.
Aaron, I'm sensing you don't agree.
Hey, look, again, another statistic. Sorry to your audience here. We spend half as much as the US.
Statistics are important, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, absolutely. The US spends about 16% of GDP on healthcare. The UK spends about 8% of GDP on healthcare. And we have universal coverage. The US does not. So, look, it's very cost-effective.
Europe are far better examples. Those are the kind of systems that we should be looking at, are the continental systems. Places like the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland. They've got universal coverage. They've got far superior outcomes to what we get in the NHS.
The Commonwealth Trust said that the NHS, I think it was in 2014, said, look, it's fantastic because it provides efficiency and effectiveness. Effectiveness because everyone is covered. Efficiency because actually we spend, as a percentage of GDP, not that much.
This is the report that said the NHS, its only failing was that it wasn't very good at keeping people alive. You know, I place quite a high premium on that in a healthcare system.
You're an economist. Economists talk about two things: principal agent problems and moral hazard. For healthcare, you need a public provider because of precisely these two problems. I don't say that. Anybody who teaches welfare economics says that. Again, I mean, on healthcare in particular, this whole free market ideology is complete baloney. I mean, it's just the opposite of what's necessary.
It works in practice on the continent. You don't. It's not theory. Just go to Germany, go to the Netherlands, go to France. Look at the healthcare systems. They're far superior.
On what measure?
On the fact that they keep people alive. Look at mortality amenable to healthcare. Mortality amenable to healthcare. That is the key judgment, is how good are they at keeping people alive.
I mean, look,
they're much better than we are.
People like you,
why don't we learn from international best practice?
Hey, look, I just told you, a think tank that specialised in healthcare said we were efficient and effective, globally #1 when you...
Yeah, but it said we weren't good at keeping people alive. That's the problem.
Alex, look, the NHS is loved for good reason. It's world class. There's not many things in Britain that are world class. Let's try.
You're in denial.
You're in denial. It's the facts. It's the facts. It's world class. Be proud of it.
OK, we're out of time, I'm afraid, gentlemen. All this is very entertaining. Alan Bastani and Alex Wilde, thank you both very much for talking to us about yesterday's autumn statement.
Plenty more still to come here on Sky News.